itbroker.com Tech Deep Dive. I'm Max Clark, and I'm here with Dani and Tim from Xcitium. And today we're going to talk about MDR and all things Xcitium and really what the world means now. So, Dani, Tim, thank you for joining. And why don't you introduce yourselves and share your official titles, and let's get into it.
Yeah. Thanks for having us. We're really excited to be here. Dani Pickens, RVP of Channel SES for our Western region, and I will turn it over to Mr. Bandos.
And I am Tim Bandos. I'm our Executive Vice President of SOC Services, so I run our Managed Detection and Response.
Okay. So you should know a little about what you guys do then. Let me tee this up here and I'll prompt you. Xcitium is a acquisition, merger, roll-up, rebrand is what I understand. So there's a lot of history that goes on. If you just look up Xcitium, you find a very short amount of details. And then if you actually start clicking down into it, you find a lot more. So can you give me the backstory and how Xcitium came to be and what you guys do and where you fit in the market?
Yeah, great. No, you actually nailed it. It is a rebrand. We rebranded as Xcitium last year in 2022, but we have a long history in the SSL certificates as the brand Komodo. And so as we started to move forward and look at this next gen technology and cybersecurity services for endpoints, we knew that we needed to have this new brand that we could move forward with that vision and long-term strategy.
I'm old enough that I've actually purchased SSL certificates from Komodo, so that name I'm very familiar with.
Dates back to 1998, so yeah, we definitely go back.
I'm definitely old enough. So what is Xcitium now? What are you guys focused on? What do you do? What separates you from the pack? Give me high level, and then we can get into the weeds.
Yeah, I mean, the way I look at it, Xcitium, we're a complete endpoint protection platform that offers, people and process behind that technology, right? So we offer managed detection response, XDR, extended detection response. If you want us to consume third-party data sources and monitor that activity as well, we do that. We've got a 24/7 SOC team. We got reverse engineers, malware analysis. We build out a complete stack of capabilities to address all of those different needs. So next generation antivirus, firewall, host intrusion prevention. We got something called auto containment or zero dwell containment, which I'm going to discuss a little bit later. And then on top of that, we wrap all those services around it.
I don't want to throw you completely off the rails. I'm going to give you two keys here and talk me through this. Let's go start to finish. And I'm going to take some notes, and then we're going to get into it because I've got, probably like 500 questions already. So I don't want to get too distracted.
That sounds great. Let's go.
Yeah. I tell you what, just to kind of talk about who Xcitium is, what it looks like, I'll start off with just a quick slide to cover the company information, and then we'll get into the real fun stuff with Bandos, showing what exactly our platform looks like. So I will share my screen here. All right. So to recap, founded in 2022, but again, that was from our rebrand. We have a focus around the endpoint security. We have our Xcitium's patented zero dwell technology, which we're excited to show you today. But it uses kernel API virtualization to isolate and remove threats like zero-day malware and ransomware before they cause any damage. We have 6,000 plus customers that we're working with and servicing today, and 27 patents here. That's going to really be a big part of our strategy and how we go to market with that zero dwell technology. We're not sharing that with anyone else, right? It's a little bit of a busy slide, but again, wanted to condense this to get over to the real fun stuff that Bandos is going to walk us through. We do have some fantastic awards and accolades. One of our latest that we've not had time to put on here is from Frost & Sullivan. We won their 2022 strategy for cybersecurity. And down below is our NASCAR slide, as I like to reference it. Some of those great customers that are in our customer base of those 6,000 plus folks. You see Shell, UPS Store, Jimmy John's, some really fantastic logos there that we work with.
Part of Xcitium is you have your own endpoint. This is software that you wrote that was developed originally under the Komodo name, and then part of it was open sourced and released. I found I think a GitHub repo for this. So is that still part of this portfolio where you're basing your MDR, XDR, EDR endpoint services on top of your own IP for this endpoint?
Yeah, back around 2017, 2018 is really when we started to develop this technology, right? The whole endpoint protection platform. And one component of that platform is endpoint detection and response. So EDR technology, the ability to collect telemetry, process creates, registry activity, things that you typically see from other EDR vendors. Our founder of this organization wanted to open source this. He believes detection should be free. right? We got to make some money though, so we charge for protection, but detection should be free and available. So we open source that just recently, so anyone can go out to GitHub, download it for free. They can stand up their own environment, or they can even leverage Xcitium services and our backend for free for 3 days storage. So they can install the EDR agent. All that data can go up into our Xcitium SIM. We give you these nice, beautiful visualizations, capabilities for alert triage. Once again, 3 days for free, not a problem.
I feel like a lot of companies right now, when they're looking and they're dipping their toes into cybersecurity, it starts with like endpoint is usually the first thing on that list. Let's go find an endpoint. From there, it turns into, okay, how do we manage this? And then it becomes, what do we layer on as well, right? So SIMs come into play, and then this fire hose of data starts coming into it. So for companies that are somewhere in that journey already, they've purchased an EDR, they're looking at rolling out E5 security from Microsoft. How does that story change with Xcitium? I mean, are you taking that EDR that already exists and feeding it into your platform if they're going MDR with you, or XDR with you, or end up being a replacement where you're going to take and displace that EDR that's already in place and use your own tech on those desktops?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think, we do a little bit of both. We have the ability to ingest additional EDR data sources, but, really our go-to-market strategy is to replace. It's a rip and replace, right? Because we think our technology is the best. We have, protection capabilities layered in with all that additional visibility. We want to leverage our own technology to do that. However, if organizations are already signed up with other EDR vendors, that's fine, because there's other data sources for us to additionally monitor, for XDR services. So we'll layer in that as well. So if we want to consume firewall, Office 365, cloud services, all those integrations are built into our technology. And we take all that data and store it in our centralized SIM as well, up to a year's worth of queryable data. And we also do advanced correlation rule sets against that data set.
This is becoming a bigger and bigger spaghetti mess for people, where it's, we started with this thing where we had Splunk for centralized logging data, and then we turned it into our SIM. And so now we've got this thing that we're feeding data into, and what do we do with it? And then we went out and we got this EDR, and then we need to figure out what to do with it. And then we decide that we need incident response capabilities or remediation capabilities. And I feel like a lot of the conversations I'm in with companies and with our clients is just trying to take stock of what's already deployed and what can be replaced, what can't be replaced, what's invested, what's not. I mean, just and navigating through that. So as you're dealing with, you've got organizations, your NASCAR slide, you've got big names there. This isn't like you're going to go walk into some multi-tens of thousands of seat company and say, okay, go and rip out everything that you have. But how much of that journey really comes into that conversation of trying to take stock of what's there and figuring out how to, I don't want to say like rip and replace isn't necessarily always available with people, right? It's there's just a time and people.
You're right, Max. The rip and replace strategy is probably one of the most difficult, right? Because they're already familiar with the endpoint technology they have. They're already familiar maybe with the name that they already have. Xcitium hasn't been around in a long time. Komodo has, but our technology, since 2017, 2018. So how do we prove ourselves in the marketplace? One thing that we do from a go-to-market strategy is we layer in our auto containment technology. So if a customer already has a CrowdStrike, or maybe they're just leveraging Windows Defender, we can take our patented technology, our containment piece, where we block unknown threats, right? And add in an additional layer of protection, for the customers that focus on that unknown activity. That's what we're going to talk about a little bit today in our slides, of how we approach cybersecurity and how we prevent unknown threats from even executing in the first place. And then we layer in, MDR services, et cetera, if they want to subscribe to that.
I'm very interested in understanding more about this. And at some point, I'm really curious also for your definition of MDR versus XDR, because I'm seeing, there's this big push always in tech marketing of like, let's layer on a new term and try to own that term, but that term doesn't really mean anything. And then other people start coagulating around that term. So
yeah, no, that totally makes sense. Should we just dive right into it? Start going through the slides? I agree. It can get confusing. Let me see if we can kind of clear that up. Let me share out my screen here. All right, Xcitium services. So let's just go right into it. We'll skip this slide about me. I'm important, but not that important. Let's go into Xcitium services. All right. So we offer this a variety of different ways, right? So we have something called Xcitium Advanced. And this is for customers who just want to leverage our technology stack and manage it themselves. We have advanced endpoint protection, which includes next generation antivirus, HIPS, firewall. They have that zero dwell containment capability, which I'll go into in a moment. We have endpoint detection and response, which is that visibility arm, right? So giving you root cause analysis of how something, ended up on an endpoint. We do a great job at blocking malware as soon as it, drops, and stopping it and preventing it. But customers also want to know, how did it even get there? Was it an end user that clicked on a link or an attachment or went to a drive-by download site? This is all important from, a security awareness perspective, or, additional security layers that need to be applied or improved upon. And then we also have this endpoint manager feature as well, where we have patch management capabilities. We have the ability to remotely, desktop into additional devices and manage mobile devices, right? So we kind of give you a full, technology stack, right, of next-gen antivirus, EDR, and then RMM, remote monitoring and management capabilities as well. So that's the Xcitium Advanced package. That's if customers want to manage themselves, up to them.
You said it twice. So you're including in advanced patch management and RMM with this service.
I am.
Okay, that's huge.
Now, for customers who are, want to slightly manage it, maybe they want to manage the technology, but they want, someone to triage the alerts that are coming in. We offer something called MDR guided, right? It's really just alert triage and analysis. Level 1, analysts looking at alerts that are coming in, right? We'll generate high fidelity threat notifications based on that activity that comes in. But that is one component that we can, if customers are just dipping their toe into the MDR field. It's hard to call it an MDR, but it's slightly managed, right? We're really just kind of offering some SOC capabilities there. Where we really go to market, though, and what we've been focusing on over the last year is providing a full end-to-end managed service, whether that's called Xcitium Managed or Xcitium Complete. Right, so those are two different services: the fully managed service offering and one that includes extended, detection response. And I'll show you what that means in a moment. The way that we look at it is, 4 primary pillars in terms of offering an MDR service. This is how I at least perceive it, along with Xcitium, right? Is one, having that complete visibility component, right? And this is where we provide our technology, the advanced protection, our EDR. And then we have something called network traffic visibility. We have a network sensor that can be deployed to environments that want to have that, XDR, flavor. So this provides packet inspection. It's got a built-in IDS. It has the ability to also ingest third-party data sources. So if you want us to consume Windows event logs, Active Directory logs, firewall logs, Linux logs, any log source, we have the ability to do that and then send it to our Xcitium SIM for alert analysis.
Is this a physical appliance or a virtual?
It's a virtual appliance. Comes as an ISO file. Can be downloaded and deployed as much as they want, right, throughout the environment. And really, what we do with that data is we analyze it for anomalous behaviors and trends and identify root causes of particular attack vectors. And this goes across endpoint, network, and cloud. So we have integrations with cloud sources as well. On top of that, we have our SOC team. I know you're going to think I'm crazy after this one, but we do offer the 24/7, 365-day Iron Glass, but we also offer for free at no additional charge incident response services. And when I say incident response services, I mean full end-to-end digital forensics and response. So if there is a breach in an environment, right, we'll provide that eyes on glass, that analysis, a full breach report, neutralization, from A to Z, walking a client through an IR. Now you might say, Tim, you guys are an endpoint protection platform. Why aren't you stopping the malware? We do a lot of that, but there are, certain situations where maybe there's a vector that's open. Maybe, a client stands up an RDP server and forgets to install Xcitium, or there's some vector that we don't have visibility to and they move in laterally, like a supply chain attack. All right, you can still be breached even though you have an endpoint protection platform in place, and we'll provide that IR, making sure that we neutralize that threat and that they aren't successful. In the case of like a ransomware being deployed right throughout the.
So wait, you're probably going to get into this in response a little bit here. Actually, talk about response, and then I'm going to ask this question.
Yeah, the real-time response. Right, we're enabled through our technology, and this is that RMM capability that allows us to automate forensic collection, block activity in real time. We can isolate endpoints from the network. We have the ability to executing custom commands or custom scripts or third-party tools. And when you have that capability, the sky pretty much becomes the limit. You can do whatever you need to do, right, across a fleet of devices. And that's incredibly useful during an IR, right? Because then you can start pulling back all that digital forensics that you need, right? Memory analysis, and then provide those answers.
There's a pretty big line, right? We talk about a company that's looking for tools and a platform, and they want to manage themselves. And then a company that wants tools and platform and advice and expertise. And then a company that wants, or a CIO that wants, hey, I don't want to worry about somebody calling somebody and looking at something at 2:00 in the morning. I just want it taken care of and dealt with. even if taking care of it and dealing with it just means unplug it from my network until we can deal with it on Monday morning. Talking through, going into RMM, if they're on a managed platform or a complete platform, will you quarantine, disconnect, disable, whatever you want, what terminology is appropriate here? If some endpoint does something or starts behaving strange or something happens to the network, at what point are you going to be in, let's call it auto mode for a company? Is that available to them?
It is available. And that all comes with the initial terms of engagement when we, enroll or onboard the client, because we want to make sure they're comfortable with us doing that sort of, neutralization effort. And we actually had to do this literally on Christmas Day of last year, where we couldn't get a hold of a client, but he had pre-authorized us to take any sort of action that we needed to take. We had saw some activity of lateral movement from a device that we didn't have we didn't have our Xcitium, technology installed on. We had to immediately start isolating, the network, right? So because we knew this was a ransomware operator, based on threat intelligence, observed, we saw their tactics and techniques. We knew what the end goal was. So we immediately cut that access off to them until we were able to actually get in touch with the CEO of the company. So cause sometimes it, just doesn't happen. It's difficult to get in touch with people. We escalated through the whole chain. But thankfully that we had those terms of engagement in place prior to that event occurring. Otherwise, they might have been successful, right? Because there's only so much we can do as long as they authorize us to do so. But that is part of.
How would you go about dealing with that? Because some people talk about, hey, we have a network appliance, it's plugged in, and we can issue TCP resets, so that way we can effectively disconnect something from the network by just not allowing it to talk to anything else to the network. Others will focus on saying, okay, we're going to have access to your network equipment, and we're going to have permissions to your firewalls or permissions to your switches. If you've got your agent running on a desktop and you've got your endpoint running, right, you have control and you have access and visibility to that endpoint. But if you have something, a fish tank, right? The fish tank gets compromised. What's the general approach in order to take action without the client? If the client gave you permissions to take action on their behalf and you can't reach them?
Yeah, I mean that's a nightmare scenario, to be honest with you. If there's a fish tank infected and we don't have access to that, and we can't get in touch, it's possible.
It's happened.
I'm sure that can happen. It has happened,
I mean,
right?
I wish that was an imaginary story, but
it's not an imaginary story. Yeah, I've been a part of silly, crazy cases like that as well. We've had telecom employees come in, backdoor the routers. Like, how do you even detect that, right? When it's an employee of another company, but they're working for a nation state, it's impossible to detect. But it's a great question. Like, what do you do in that sort of scenario? We would do everything we could to get in touch because we don't have access to network devices, right? It's we can only do so much with our network sensor in terms of IDS and doing resets. But yeah, if we don't have access to that aquarium, that's a problem because they're going to attempt to continue to move laterally, especially if they have credentials at that point. It might even come down to us executing commands to lock out accounts, right? Because we have complete domain administrative access with our technology. I mean, you can log into the AD as a system user and then start running commands. So those are doomsday scenarios. We haven't had to do that yet, but it is available, to us.
But it's there. So, I mean, the point of this is if it got to that level and people are at a Christmas party and have had too much punch, you're going to take care of it and do whatever, if they've said and signed up and said, we want you to take care of this. And if you can't get a hold of us, go crazy, do what you need to do. Like, you're going to do it. Okay.
I'd have to leave my Christmas party to do it, but I would do it because that's what I've signed up for. That's my job, right? So yes, that sort of scenario does happen. That's a great question. So kind of back to where we left off on the RMM piece. So in addition, right, to all those different capabilities in terms of response, we also have that patch management visibility and the ability to, patch operating systems, patch third-party applications, right? So we can run reports to see if there are any vulnerable devices and what those vulnerabilities, look like from a criticality perspective. And then with a click of a button, we can patch those, those devices.
So mobile device management. I mean, are you talking cell phones here, iPhones, Androids, tablets? Okay, interesting. So, how deep are you getting into the MDM or UEM space with this software? I mean, is this something that you would displace an Intune with, or how?
I'm sure my company would love for me to say we can displace that. But the way I look at it from a range of capabilities, we have the ability to wipe, we have the ability to apply policies, to prevent applications from running and whitelisting. We're not like a full suite. That isn't our core, I think, capability, but we offer it and it's available to customers. And we do have a good number of customers that do leverage it, as a service. But kind of depends, right, on the size of the customer and what they want to do. Because if it satisfies those use cases, then
I have some organizations that are trying to adhere to NIST COPE, so they want to have a corporate-owned, personally enabled device, a cell phone. So right now you have to have containers on that cell phone to actually say, okay, we can remote wipe the corporate data on this device, or we can inspect traffic interacting with corporate data, but like we're not going to delete your photos off the phone. It's a very specialized kind of MDM UEM platform for that. Data can only be accessed by corporate-owned devices, and so then how do you deal with that? And you kind of like touch into these things where it's like it's not really a CASB, it's not really a DLP rule, but you have this kind of thing in between where it's like we want to make sure that we have a certificate on a device and that certificate is inspected, and it's a relatively lightweight thing to say, okay, push out this config, but it still has to be there and be in place, and then you get into this dialogue around how many different agents are running and how how much resources do you have on a machine, and like that becomes an interesting conversation.
It does, and to get to that level of granularity, it's we're just not there, right? From our perspective, we even offer a DLP functionality where we do light DLP for data loss prevention, but it's not a primary go-to-market strategy either, right? It's just if you want us to stop or prevent PCI or HIPAA data from leaving your organization, we can have a rule that does that, but we're not like I was going to say Digital Guardian because that was the last company I was with that just got acquired. But we're not like a Digital Guardian with a full range of capabilities and data loss, So I think it comes down to use cases, right? Yeah, like what are you looking to solve? And if it's light, then we could definitely solve it.
I'm still surprised to see these bullet points on the slide, so I'm just digging into it a little bit.
In terms of how we where we also get augmented is there our threat intelligence piece. We've got something called Xcitium Verdict Cloud, which is kind of similar to like a virus total, but not in the sense where we have a million different AV engines running. It's really just our own. But really, what Xcitium Verdict Cloud does is it verdicts every single sample that is collected, either it be trusted or if it's unknown, we do a static analysis, a dynamic analysis of it, and we provide a verdict to it. Is it safe or is it malware? And this ties into our unknown protection, right? Our containment capabilities, which I'll show you in a moment. But it's nice because you can search any hash on the site, and it's for free to sign up too. And you get all the metadata details associated with that binary, what it does dynamically, where we would put that in terms of the threat. Like, is it a piece of ransomware? Is it a backdoor, a rootkit? So it's got a ton of different features in terms of the amount of data that we report on each and every individual binary that gets uploaded. We got a team of around 40 plus, threat researchers and reverse engineers too that, is in this organization. So they're working day in and day out, looking at binaries all the time. Then on top of that, we also do, behavioral-based rules and, MITRE mapping, to the MITRE attack, framework. And that gets layered in with our EDR telemetry as well.
And Max, that Xcitium Verdict Cloud, that's actually public facing. So you can go to our website on that and see that anytime. It's really cool. We'll have to take a look at it later on.
Having threat intel or having something where you're taking cert feeds and you can correlate this. The nightmare scenario for most organizations isn't necessarily like there's something that matches a signature that's already known. It's these modified binaries, true zero-day attacks, things that look okay but aren't okay. And it feels like the percentage of that is actually increasing. Now, of course, with all these different AI tools and stuff coming out, when we look at like phishing attacks and whatnot, the sophistication is increasing because they have just access to, they can increase the volume of what they're, what an attacker is actually doing. And it's easy for them to increase that volume. How does like the 0-day factor into all these things? Like,
again, yeah, I mean, that's another good question. I used to work for a large manufacturing company, 200-plus-year-old company, had millions of trade secrets. Every single incident that we ever worked, in this particular organization, every single indicator was not something known to the world. So there's no threat intel, list or feed that matched up with that hash or matched up with those capabilities. Like, yeah, maybe the techniques that the adversary use, like maybe they use 2-letter binaries like tb.exe out of a particular directory. Like the behavior was maybe something you could line up, but there's no threat intelligence that could have mapped to that. We dealt with that every single day. We subscribe to a million different threat intelligence sources as well. Nothing helped us in that particular field, which is why we really always focused on the behavior, right? Like, lateral movement activity. So if, just because the name of the binary was tb.exe, if you look at some of the other metadata, it might have been, sysinternals, psexec. So if you see those two as a correlation rule, that's a mismatch, right? Like we know internally, no one would ever use a renamed, binary such as psexec. So it always kind of comes down to, when you're doing threat hunting or pivoting and looking through that data, those are the types of things you got to look at. Like what is normal behavior versus what kind of stands outside those lines. And that's where you start to identify, potential 0 days. One thing that we used to do with looking for, beaconing activity, command and control activity, right? We would, aggregate all that data. We would look at all the sites that it went outbound to, and we would look for, pings, once a day to a, specific site over a week period. If we only saw 7 over the course of 7 days, that might be indicative of, a command and control, like something phoning home. That type of stuff was, and we were hugely successful back in 2008, 2009 with that approach, because malware, was pretty straightforward from that perspective. It becomes harder today, right? The beaconing activity, going out to Twitter and pulling down something from an image file and then doing something like, how do you detect that? You know what I mean? It becomes more of a nightmare scenario for us.
20 years ago, I was working for a company and I was asked to block Yahoo Instant Messenger. And we started going through it, and it turned out that like it would start failing back into more and more commonly used services. And like one of the last failbacks was like actually going to yahoo.com port 443. And you're like, okay, great. How do we block this? Right? It's like, okay, I can block this now, but we have to literally block all of Yahoo traffic in order to block this thing. And it was really impressive.
It becomes impossible. Yeah. I mean, we had a threat actor one time leverage our internal Microsoft Link, or what is Teams today, Link server, as a command and control. They were able to find a route out, and like literally going under the radar is another, like an understatement. We were only able to detect it because there was a web shell that was, beaconing that activity through our Link server. And we're like, what is this? So that's what, once again, comes down to, kind of threat hunting and looking for these anomalies, right? Across
MDR services, fit into kind of a defensive and reactive, approach, right? You're trying to identify, contain, and then react and clean and remediate, an event that's happened and taken place. And part of the security word soup that we deal with, you go into like more of these, like, I don't want to say like offensive measures, but, if you look at, segmentation, zero trust, secure web gateways, remote browser inspection, this other kind of like shell that's coming on. When people are looking at and trying to decide like, okay, should I go out and deploy and go full SASE and have, an agent with, protected network internet access with everything flowing through our gateways and traffic everywhere and, effectively segmentation on our network should we do that? Or should we go after the endpoint MDR, IR, side of it? Or what's the contrast there and how do people make sense of this?
I like how you said SASE. Yeah, like do you go down the SASE route? For sure. I mean, I think it depends on, the size of the organization, where they are at, from a strategy perspective. I think the end goal would be to kind of get to that zero trust, right, functionality. But what's mind blowing to me, Max, is it's this low hanging fruit stuff that just still gets exploited. It's like 80% of these attacks a lot of times just happen because of a link that someone clicked on or an attachment, right? It's not something that's, email. It's email. Like that is the primary vector a lot of times. Or once again, an RDP server that stood up and they have weak domain admin credentials on that server that they're able to brute force their way in. So no two-factor authentication. It's these basic controls that organizations just don't put in place. So even before you get to like the whole SASE and zero trust thing, like just get the basics down first.
I mean, at this point, having some sort of two-factor or MFA enabled on, look, that's table stakes at this point. And there's a lot that don't run it, which is amazing. And, organizations that are not on Microsoft 365 or are not on Google Workspace, it's just like, what are you guys doing? Move to one of those platforms and enable MFA and use that platform's MFA capability. And it gives you so much just doing that, which you're already paying for, which is like the core of of collaboration and productivity at this point. It's like, just do that. Start there. Security maturation model, right? It's like, oh, here's this ladder of steps that come up to like, oh, you're down here with no security and you're the NSA over here, right? And then now pick which one you want. And it's like, it's not like, oh, I want like a 2 out of a 5 on a scale. I think the security industry in whole isn't really doing a lot of service for itself or for its customers of what is the steps that you take and say, okay, we've got the basics, we've got two-factor enabled and we've got SSO enabled and we have an IDP and, identity, we have our identity covered. Now, what do we do?
They call that the journey, right? The security, maturity, going through that entire journey. But I agree with you. It's like all rated on a 1 to level 5. Like, how mature am I? I think it's taking those baby steps first. And that's why, we try to solve a lot of those problems with an MDR type service. Like if you're not going to do a lot of those table stake type things, at least monitor for it so that you at least know you have a problem or a threat, within your organization. A lot of the organizations that we work with are smaller businesses. It could be like a dental office, right, that has 30 or 40 endpoints, but it still needs protection, right? Because, they get held up for ransomware as well. And if they get hit by ransomware, they might not be able to afford $1 million ransomware note, right? So, they don't look at security like we do. They're not hiring a CISO. They're not hiring even probably someone ahead of, security. It's just like an IT guy who wears a hat of security who might just dabble in it. And I don't think they're ever going to get to that point. And that's really where we try to kind of wedge ourselves in, right? And is a lot of times those organizations who need assistance, that's why we consider ourselves MDR for the masses, right? It's not just, the large enterprises or organizations that have 20, 30,000 endpoints. We've got customers like that, but we really try to also fit in those spaces where it's, 500 endpoints, 1,000 endpoints, because they have I don't want to say, I'm not trying to belittle them, but they have no clue from a cybersecurity perspective what they're really facing.
The scary conversation I get to have is, we've enabled Defender and Sentinel for Microsoft and we've got it covered. And you're just like, okay, I don't think you actually know what that means. For most of these situations, it's an eventuality. Like you will have a cyber incident. It's an eventuality. And are you prepared for it? And can you react to it? Become very critical for companies and make a huge difference in the impact of the organization, the financial impact of the organization, the brand impact of the organization, whether or not they're going to recover from that event in the first place or not.
Yeah. And I think a lot of times it also comes down to price point. These, smaller organizations don't have, allocated budget for a lot of these advanced cybersecurity solutions. So, Xcitium saw that as an opening where let's make ours a little bit more affordable, right? We'll still make some gross margin there, but let's make it affordable that these smaller shops can have an MDR service and get protected at the same time. And we've been relatively successful. We've done pretty well over the last year and a half, just focusing on that segment of the market because they can't afford, some of the big names, which I won't drop, but some of the big names. So that's how we structure our MDR service. In terms of deliverables, they always want to know, like, what do I get out of this service? This is what we provide, right? So the 24/7, 365 days a year, eyes on glass alerting. That means level 1 through level 3 triage and analysis. We do weekly and monthly reporting. Do our customers look at all those reports? Probably not. But there's a nice lot of trends and stuff in there that will give them insight, executive summaries, here's the value that the service is providing. We do all the profile and policy management, so they don't have to worry about it, right? They buy the technology stack from us and we do all the services and everything else on top of that for them, just making sure that it's hardened for them, right? Because we've had customers who have purchased that one solution where they want to manage it themselves. I've seen them whitelist like their entire C drive and just allow everything to basically execute. I'm like, nah, that's going to be a problem for you. And it was actually, because they were like, we got infected. It's your fault. But unfortunately, it's not really our fault when you start whitelisting stuff like that. So we try to avoid that scenario.
Show me 100 firewalls. I'll show you 100 allow everything outbound policies.
Right. Allow everything. Right. That's at the bottom of the list. Right. And then we also provide that proactive threat hunting, active breach containment. You talked about threat, live remediation support. That's one of those deliverables, right? Like take action on my behalf because I could be at a Christmas party and I need your assistance doing that. And then we also have monthly meetings with every single one of our customer accounts with the primary stakeholder, just to make sure that they're receiving the value out of the service that, they're expecting. Are there any sort of enhancements that they're looking? Are there any custom requests that they'd like to see from us? So we make sure we have that touch point with them so it feels like a white glove service and they're not just a number, as a part of our, our overall MDR service. Just the final point is, if customers want that full end-to-end complete XDR flavor, and, I use XDR, I really mean, monitoring additional data sources beyond endpoint, they could subscribe to that, right? Have the network sensor deployed, get network log traffic visibility. We can ingest all those additional, event logs, firewall logs, and also cloud monitoring. And that seems to be like the winner. Like everyone pretty much goes with that because they want everything monitored. They just want to sit back and have someone else deal with it. The differentiator, look at that, perfect timing. Let's bring it up. So I call it the differentiator. We call it zero dwell containment. That's our marketing term. It's an auto containment capability where what we're doing is we're virtualizing the hard drive, the registry, and the COM interface. Right. So anything that is unknown, if it's an unknown hash to the world, if it's an unknown piece of script or code, we allow it to execute, but only in this container, basically, that exists on the endpoint. And there's almost negligible to zero overhead as well, right? We're not I don't want to bring up the name, but Murmium from back in the day where they did a hypervisor across the whole device and brought everything down. We're a very small segment of the operating system where we're intercepting those APIs. And I'll show you what that looks like kind of visually, but we do it in a nice, elegant way. And we have patents for this capability. So no other vendor can.
So registry and COM interface is very much Windows-specific terminology. Endpoints run on Mac, and you have people in Linux and et cetera, or is this a Windows-focused tool?
So our initial go-to-market was with Windows. We're active development for Linux and Mac containment capabilities, right? You can understand some of the restrictions on Mac. It's been difficult with all the changes, especially with that OS over the last couple of years. But that containment capability is absolutely coming. We do have a lot of the antivirus type capabilities, within Linux and Mac today, and we support a ton of different Linux flavors as well. But that containment piece isn't there yet.
Linux shipped SE Linux, I don't know, 10 years ago. And most of the distros enabled SE Linux by default. And it became like this default policy for anybody running Linux to disable SE Linux as part of their install scripts. What's the user interaction or the admin interaction as this thing is going? So when you say zero dwell containment and it's virtualized.
Yeah, the experience. So the end user experience, this is all configurable as well. But let's say, for example, if a phishing attachment comes in, right, to an end user, they open up that attachment and there's, suspect code that's entrenched inside a PDF. There's going to be a green container around the PDF notifying the user that something is going on in the background, right, that we've contained a piece of code, but we're still allowing the end user to interact with that document, right? They can view the contents, they can, even edit the document and save it to the container, but it's not touching the actual hard drive, right? It's not being stored or saved anywhere on the disk itself. It's all virtualized, right, inside the container. So it doesn't, basically it prevents any sort of damage, right, from the code even running in the first place. And then once our Xcitium Verdict Cloud does a determination on either that piece of code or that binary to say, yes, it's safe, it then releases it from the container. And it's really seamless to the end user.
Are you providing this data reporting back to admin users to say, hey, this is this software that's running on all your devices, and you've got this stuff running out there that you don't know about?
Yeah, so we offer complete software inventory visibility. You can see every single version that's running, every application that's executing, everything too that we've contained versus not contained. We also capture the script content of whatever has been executed as well, and we can report that up to the console. So if you even want to see the contents of a particular script that ran, you could do some reverse engineering or analyze that data as well, because you're going to need that visibility sometimes if you need to do that human element, right? Just to make sure that it isn't something a little more nefarious. But anything that's suspect, right? Once again, we're containerizing that, and that's at execution time. And then we have our full stack, of course, on the pre-execution and then the post-execution as a service.
So is everything always running in a container, or at some point, Verdict Cloud comes back and says, "Yep, we know this. It's good. It doesn't run in virtualized?"
Yeah, not everything, right? Everything that, so let's say, SVC host executes or, task list or any of those binaries execute on a program. We all know those are legitimate programs. They're all trusted, right? There's trusted hashes. They've been out there, in the world for years or maybe even just a year, right? And it's trusted, known good. There's no, behavioral anomalies associated with it. We allow it to run automatically, right? There's no impact. For anything that's, once again, unknown, like if you search the hash on Google or VirusTotal, right, and it's completely unknown to the world, no matter what it is, we're containerizing it, right? We want to make sure and validate that it's safe before allowing it, right, the air and the water and everything else that it needs to breathe on an operating system.
So something gets through an email filter. User clicks a link, downloads a payload, application does something, goes crazy. At what point do flags start getting raised of saying, this thing is trying to talk laterally, it's trying to do something that it shouldn't be doing, it's talking to something we think is a command and control? Like how does that escalate through that? We haven't seen this before, now it's doing something strange to get rid of this thing.
So it's immediately flagged and contained, once again, at execution, so pre-execution, we have something called FLS, which is a file lookup. So every single file that even exists on the disk right before it even executes, we're doing lookups and we're verdicting, all those different binaries. And the second that it runs, right, if it's unknown, we then submit that to the Verdict Cloud. If it starts doing things really nefarious, it gets killed, right? Once again, these are all controls or knobs you can turn. If you want it to automatically kill, automatically get wiped from the container, you can do that. Or if you just want to allow it to still exist within the container and have the container wiped a day later, you could do that. right? We recommend having that thing killed immediately because, we don't want any risk, occurring to the end user, because let's say they open up a document, it tries to run some code, but maybe there's also a link in there that takes them to a website that they're trying to phish credentials, right? Credential phishing is tough to stop, right? Because there's no malware necessarily associated with it. They're just asking for your password. And once they have that, boom, they're in, right? They're in your environment, especially when you don't have two-factor. Like maybe they're looking for your Office 365 login. We see that quite a bit as well. And I can show you kind of how that works, right? So, how we go about doing that, right, is defeating zero-day attacks. We call it kernel API virtualization. And there's really 5 objects. I only have 3 on the other slide, but it's file system registry, kernel objects, services, and that COM interface. And that's where we layer in, we provide this virtualization layer. And this is what it kind of looks like from more of a graphic.
How much overhead does this add to a computer? If you're dealing with an aging fleet and now their desktops, their laptops have to, are running this in addition to, running what their applications are. Is this something where you have to factor in at a certain size? I mean, is this like, hey, we've got to make sure we have this much RAM or this much CPU capacity? Or
incredibly lightweight. You can run this thing on an XP with 512 megabytes of RAM. We've seen it run, no problem.
I feel bad for those
because
people.
All we're doing is, I do feel bad. They still exist, by the way, and Windows 2000 servers. I mean, what's going on, guys? But once again, it's just API interception, right? We're intercepting those APIs and just redirecting them. So we're not, building a whole hypervisor or consuming all these resources to, containerize it. It's just interception with, a thin restriction layer. But yeah, that question comes up quite a bit, right? Because any sort of endpoint that you're adding, or agent to what you're adding to the endpoint that's the question. What's the impact on memory? What's the impact on resources?
I've had some secure internet access, SWG clients, and you install it and you put it on a cell phone, and then you just watch the battery just kind of go and just end, and you're like, what did this thing just do? Yeah, I can't use this. It's great, like wonderful, kind of small problem there.
So we were doing a POC one time at my last company. And listen, there was no fault of my last company, but we were running our solution on a Mac and the battery caught fire. And somehow they literally blamed it on the agent. They're like, your agent has so much overhead that it caught I mean, look, that one's still to TBD is what I call it. It's to be determined if that was really the case. But yeah, if you've got something that's heavy, I mean, it does drain and have an operational impact to the battery.
Segue a little bit here. SIM and XDR. This becomes a really confusing, sales motion, right? You start talking about SIMs and you start, questions become like, okay, let's try to size this environment, right? You get to a converse point where it's, how much does this cost? And that becomes, well, how much data are you sending? And I think 100 out of 100 companies are also going to say, I have absolutely no idea how much data and telemetry data I'm going to send to your SIM. So from a sizing exercise with somebody that's actually looking at this and of course it wants, how do you go through that sizing exercise with that company, and how much variability do you see, company to company based on utilization?
Yeah, Max, this is where you're going to think we're a little insane with how we price that. We actually don't take that into consideration. We just price it per endpoint. So we don't actually look at how much data we're ingesting.
I actually don't think you're insane. I actually really like that answer because it makes it really easy to explain.
Super easy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because the other way is insane. It's hard. It's impossible. I mean, if you haven't,
what's the gigabytes per? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Okay,
so
great.
We've made it a lot easier on the sales people, and for a reason, right? And then the reason why we do that too is because we've got some accounts who ingest very little. Maybe it's a couple thousand events per day, and then we got ones that are over the top, right? So it levels out from a pricing perspective. We still hit our margins fine, with doing that, but it also removes that complexity from the conversation because no one wants to figure that out.
You can't. You can't. It's impossible.
You can't. I 100% agree with you.
You're like, okay, great. We have 2,000 endpoints and X amount of virtual instances running in these places, plus Office 365, plus this, plus that, and you're like, okay, great. What does that mean for us? And then you get a spreadsheet, and it's like, oh, we think you're going to be this much data, and you're like, but it could be more, it could be less. We'll find out.
Yeah, the way that we approach that, and that's why the salespeople love that model, and we're just going to continue to go down that. Onboarding deployment almost feels like a breeze too. Typically we have an implementation, kickoff call where we go through, what does Xcitium installation configuration look like? We do testing and deployment. This is where we, discuss all the technical details, right, of the deployment. It's very easy because what we do is we spin up an environment. This takes a matter of not even minutes. It takes maybe a minute to spin up an environment. And then there's packages that you can be downloaded that only communicate with that specific environment, right? So we keep it multi-tenanted. It's very easy for deployment. They can leverage any tool that they want to, do deployment, through. And then stage one is enabling all these different things you see there on the left, right? That's our full stack, file rating, buyer scope, HIPS firewall. We call it stage one. It's kind of like the learning phases. Even with our host intrusion prevention, we do a heuristic, like a learning mode. Let's baseline your gold image. And then, after stage one, maybe a week or 2 weeks, we convert it over to stage two, and then you're off to the races, right? If someone wants something super locked down, you can go to stage three, and then you can start getting more granular in terms of what you want to block on. But typically stage two covers all the bases, protecting your environment from 0 days and everything else. But the implementation just comes in the form of PS, professional service hours, and there's not a lot of hours really that takes to do these sort of deployments. It's very straightforward and easy, especially if you do MDR, because we're managing it all for you. So really, it's just meeting with the client, making sure they're comfortable with everything, showing them how to log in and see tickets and how to file help desk requests if they have any sort of issues. But everything is managed for them, right? So they don't have to do a lot. And then deployment just kind of takes it from there. So we just kind of guide them through this process, review the status, and they're off to the races. So we can move as fast as they're able to move, basically.
So this is kickoff. You're going to have a weekly check-in, make sure everything's moving forward. After deployment, what kind of interaction? I mean, besides like, hey, you can log into our console and you can see, data. Are you doing monthly updates? Is this quarterly updates? Is this weekly updates? I mean, what's the back and forth?
Yep. It's monthly, right? So we set up monthly calls with them. We have a whole customer success team as well that'll engage. We have multiple touch points. The SOC team will engage with them. Also, a customer success team will engage. Professional services will only come back if they need additional hours for other setups. Maybe they want to expand into XDR and deploy network sensors. They could pay 2 hours, right? And then boom, they're off to the races. But we think it's absolutely critical, right, to connect with our customers on that regular cadence, because you wait quarterly or any longer than that, they forget about you. Then comes, renew time. They're going to say, what have you done for me? And especially with smaller shops, it becomes a problem. Like you have 20 endpoints and I'm giving you MDR and I haven't given you any malware alerts. It's because maybe you have a boring environment, basically, right? There's not a lot that goes on.
MDR has become a very crowded space. There's a relatively small amount of EDR vendors, people that are actually producing EDR agents. And some are trying to push, or have pushed into the MDR space and saying, okay, we're going to provide MDR services on top of our EDR platform. There's a lot of companies in the market now that are saying that they run SOCs, saying that they have an MDR, that as companies, as this gets more crowded and more noisy and more confusing, how does somebody actually go through the process of figuring out? We try to do it ourselves. We couldn't because we realized it's just trying to bite off too much. We just don't have the expertise, and we're not trying to do this ourselves. So we know we want endpoint protection, and we know that we want an MDR, and we know we want to have these other things layered into it. How do they decide at that point?
Yeah, a lot of the prospects that we talk to, that come onto these calls, they might have what they think in mind is everything that they need, to kind of be put in place. But once they see the range of, even you said it during the conversation, oh, you guys offer patch management capabilities or visibility, they might not even realize where they could also replace other technologies that they have deployed. So I think it comes like, I kind of need an MDR service, or I need maybe EDR or something like that. And then we broaden that horizon. We say, by the way, you could replace all these other things over the course of, this relationship, right? You could purchase a part of it now, and then as you expand, we can replace. And I think it kind of comes down to what we provide as a part of the service is also security guidance. I think having that reliance, right, like a breach-free warranty and free incident response services, we need to differentiate ourselves a little bit, right, compared to the other MDR players. And that's where we would like to focus. Not always on price. I hate differentiating on price. You don't want to be the cheapest thing in the market, right? Because then what is your value? But we like to differentiate on the service, right, that we offer, and then obviously the capabilities as well.
Just to touch on that warranty too, as cybersecurity insurance is a huge focus for companies, and can we get it? What's it going to cost? That warranty and some of the check boxes that we help with, we hope helps drive that cybersecurity insurance down for companies.
I'm really curious what happens with cybersecurity insurance here as this year continues in the following years, because there's been a lot of large carriers starting to exclude and step back from providing cybersecurity insurance and remediation insurance. And I mean, so like Lloyd's of London was a pretty big warning shot, right? We're not going to insure and pay out for state-sponsored hacking. I think for a while there was this idea of like, oh, we can go get cyber insurance. And then it became a strategy of how do we make our cyber insurance cheaper? Oh, if you get these tools, your policy costs you less, and then that would take care of it. I don't know how much that persists and that lasts.
Yeah,
going forward.
We hear that all the time, that there's that fear that it may just go away, because at the end of the day, insurance companies are a business. They're there to make a profit, and they keep shelling money out for these incidents. Well, it's going to go away.
You mentioned dentists. So my dentist, I can remember when they went digital, right? So integrated, computers at every bed, right? But I mean, 20 computers, 25 computers in their office, probably. Not really sophisticated in the sense of at 25 computers, you're going to have a sophisticated IT operation, but sophisticated that everything's digital. X-rays went digital. Everything's on that computer. It's, you can't, if that turns off, I don't know what they would or would not be able to do. People now at this point looking at it and say, okay, we're a dentist and we were at a dental association meeting and we heard a horror story from this other dental office that had ransomware that crippled their business. And so now we're going to go out and investigate this and go find this.
Yeah. I mean, Max, I think sometimes you even answer your own question sometimes when you ask the question, because that's exactly what we've seen. And especially, I get anxiety going to the dentist when I see like their Post-it notes literally on like the screen, like their admin password. I'm like, what are you guys doing? Like, anyone can walk into this chair, know your credentials to get in, and your Wi-Fi is open, so I can just hop on your network. I have access to your network. I can log into your domain controller, whatever, right? Like, it's just readily available. So I've at least hardened my dental office, through advice. I tried to get a lower bill. That didn't happen. Because those dentists, they know how to charge.
Altruistic. It was altruistic cybersecurity.
Yeah, right. So we're seeing more and more just businesses out of nowhere. Even car dealerships are asking for protection because they're concerned about that $500,000 ransomware note. I have a good friend who actually runs. It's not a dealership. It's just a law firm, small little law firm, right? But they got ransomwared and they had to pay out $300,000 because they didn't have all the other controls like backups and everything else. And she's like, how do I can't even pay for that. So I think they're now just scared of that nightmare scenario, and they're paying for these services. And
predictions for, it's March. It's March of 23. I had to look at the calendar because my brain doesn't work that way anymore. Predictions for the rest of the year, next year. I mean, so one of the biggest things that I used to track and follow really closely was this idea of dwell time. How long did somebody get on a network and sit on the network before they launched an attack? And a few years ago, it was, 200 plus days of dwell time. And now these stats have gotten really short, like a couple of days of dwell time and lots of sophistication around like, the hierarchy of attackers, right? Where, maybe somebody gets into a network and then immediately flips that credential to somebody else. And then that other person, that other team, that other group, that other person, whatever it is going to go out and actually investigate and figure out what they can extract out of that. Are we going to see more companies investing in this? Is that going to tip the scales? Are we going to see more horror stories like Colonial Pipeline of like people pumping gas into the back of their cars and tarps? Like what's...
Yeah, Max, I think it's only going to get worse. And I hate to use, even examples like Chat GPT, writing its own malware and, behavior. I mean, I could ask Chat GPT to write, a signature from the MITRE framework and it writes it perfectly for me, right? And I say, put it in Splunk format or something. It's like, when you get to that level of capability and then adversaries start leveraging it, they're only going to become harder and harder. The defender's job is, I don't want to say it's impossible, but it's almost impossible, right? I mean, because you kind of get to this point. And the dwell time is extremely scary, especially when you get to state-sponsored cases where it's not even days, it's a matter of hours, right? It's an 8-hour work shift where they know exactly what they're going after. We've worked cases where we've seen that in the timeline. It was, from 8 a.m. their time to, around 4 p.m., China time.
Break for lunch.
Break for lunch. You see the act. Yeah, no, it literally dips during lunchtime. And it's sad, right, that we've gotten to that point. I mean, I remember when I had my first child, it was in the delivery room. We had a nation state threat actor get into our organization. They broke in and I was working the case while working the delivery room. And I said, that's it. I'm not working on Chinese New Year. Like let's have the trial during Chinese New Year, because then I know we won't be breached.
So some organizations have a higher risk profile, right? Obviously banks, casinos, and financial organizations, there's a risk profile. If you're industrial and you're manufacturing, you have intellectual property, right? There's, you're at a different risk profile. The majority of companies or, nonprofits, NGOs, whatever it is, healthcare organizations are going to say, we're not a target because we don't have anything that people want, right? Which is not true. How much of this is just like low hanging fruit, where if you've taken like very menial steps, right? Like just the simple stuff of just, do you have two-factor authentication deployed? Do you have a decent endpoint deployed? I mean, how much does that really eradicate that risk from, these non-targeted attacks? Just moving on. It's not worth the energy to spend any more time here.
Yeah, I mean, there's groups dedicated to just that initial infiltration, and then they sell that access, and that's the low-hanging fruit. I mean, those people are making out. Like they're selling that access to ransomware operators, and then ransomware operators will come in, move laterally, deploy their own ransomware. That is low-hanging fruit. But even these large organizations, casinos and banks and stuff, like they have these IoT devices now, and they might neglect, because that one fish tank one wasn't that a casino? That was a casino, I think, out in Vegas. But anything that's internet connected is attack surface, right? It's readily available for anyone that can access that. So, I think to that point, I don't think it matters what organization you are, big, small, or the level of security controls you have in place. There's always a vector for an adversary to get in, and they're going to take advantage of that. It doesn't matter. So we're seeing a massive increase in these lower hanging fruits, though, and that's what we see because we're now in this market. Maybe that's the reason why I'm seeing it more, because now we're finally selling to that. My last company, we focused on enterprise, and all we saw was larger, targeted. But we see this consistently now, even in the headlines. And a lot of times it's not even reported. Like my friend, it's not like that got reported in the news, but we didn't hear about it. Right. So I think it's hard to also capture those metrics on.
A piece of news hit last night, this morning, and it's a proposal from the White House to shift cybersecurity requirements from organizations into technology providers. And, it's vague, and it says, legislation will be proposed, sometime in 24 for this, but I read that, of course, as it's saying, okay, Microsoft is now your fault, your responsibility to make sure that all your customers are secure if they're using Office 365. Is that doing a disservice, to the average organization in terms of what their roles and risks and responsibilities are versus, what other people are going to take care of? I mean, I'm not saying this like as an anti-Microsoft or anti-Google thing, but they're going to have a carve out in this legislation that says, oh, if you didn't secure your password, we were not liable for it, right? Like there's reasonable levels of care that have to be conducted, taken. Otherwise, it's not reasonable for us to be responsible for it.
At the same time, I would love Microsoft to be responsible, actually, because if they didn't detect a piece of malware, then they might come and say, well, you didn't buy our advanced protection, or APT, threat level service. I'm like, what is that about? You know what I mean? Like you're supposed to stop malware on my endpoint, your Windows Defender. And it's not just them. I don't think it should be placed on the vendors. I do think these businesses have a level of responsibility in security. I do wish the government would stay out of that, but maybe you need to push not just the vendors, but also organizations to have that, minimum level of security, like two-factor, like make it a standard, like that needs to be in place. If you're protecting customer data or you're protecting anything, your own business, we need to have a certain level of control. But that's a tough one, man. That becomes a huge political debate, to be honest with you. Like who's responsible? Because we should be held responsible if we didn't protect the piece of malware. But that's why we offer money back. Here's a breach-free warranty. We think about that. We try to be nice.
I don't think that government regulation or insurance is going to be the saving grace for us. I for a long time, I actually thought that it was either going to be government regulation or insurance was going to be the saving grace to actually force reasonable cybersecurity postures for most companies. And I'm not holding my breath for that anymore. And it's the risk of this is terrifying. I've had hospitals, call us after they've been breached, and it's then you get into really scary stuff where you're like, oh, we've got to start, transferring patients from one hospital to another hospital because we can't, provide care because we can't. And that stuff is really scary. It's,
I do think the government also is a little choosy with who they help protect. So I don't know if I'm getting in trouble for saying this, but even at that large organization that I worked for, I would have a 3-letter agency come and knock on my door and say, hey, search your SIM for this IP address. You're owned, and we know this. So they have insight into everything, right, that's transpiring across these networks and stuff. But they were right. Like, we had a nation state adversary that got past our defenses. They had a command and control, foothold. They just told us. I mean, did they tell everybody that stuff? I doubt it, right? I mean, I think it could be a bandwidth issue, but that sort of stuff too kind of also piques my interest. Like, how did you know that?
I think I wouldn't want to be in charge of making those decisions, because on the one side, it's like you want to alert people and you want to protect people and you want to share people, but then you always kind of counter that with you don't want the adversary to know that you know what the adversary is doing, right?
Right.
And trying to make that call and like, I'm okay not having that responsibility right now in my life.
I can't imagine it, to be honest with you, because it's not just one organization. It's probably a plethora, right, that they have command and control access to. So they probably want a larger sting takedown operation. I get that. But it's like, how do you get that relationship too going where you're getting some of those tips so you can protect your trade secrets? Because if they see something, they're not always saying something, and that gives the adversary dwell time, which then gives them the chance to exfiltrate data.
Xcitium straddles an interesting fence here, where you're creating intellectual property and you have an endpoint, and then you're providing MDR services as well. How adversarial or friendly is this industry with each other? I mean, is there like a secret convention of EDR vendors that get together and share notes or MDR services, at some level of like, this is what we're seeing, and we're all in this together? I mean, because adoption of these things as a percentage basis. I mean, the TAM for endpoint is every device ever made, right? And the TAM for MDR is every organization running a device ever made. So, the TAMs are infinite on both sides. So then it's now people actually adopting this technology hasn't really caught, I mean, we've got years of work ahead of us in adoption of technology, but it's not like a total TAM, it's not a TAM issue.
We don't have a secret society. If anything, it's a, and I've seen this, unfortunately. I at all costs avoid this is the bad mouthing, or even trying to say that they don't have all of these capabilities. Like, have you ever seen those side by side? Like, show me a battle card of this technology versus all your others. What you do is you say, oh, they only have 2 of the 37 things, and we have 37 of 37 things. It's so dishonest, and it's not even true. I can't stand battle cards.
My version of that is show me an RFP and I'll tell you who wrote it.
Right, exactly. So you'll know exactly who did it. Or they'll say, they basically write your services that you provide, but maybe that's not even true. So look, I think EDR vendors, they pay attention to the capabilities and the services and stuff that they offer. I think there's some that, try to outdo one another with marketing and whatnot. We're trying to avoid that noise. I know sometimes we might generate some noise when we probably shouldn't, but we try to focus on the customers and just focus on our go-to-market strategy, right? Focus on MDR for the masses, people who can't afford the larger names, and let's see how successful we can be. Offer them a white glove service. I mean, we've been successful so far, so let's continue to do that. But I think when you start worrying about other vendors, it can become a problem.
So, Dani, somebody that is Xcitium curious, we've talked a little bit about deployment and onboarding, but what is that process and timeline? I mean, how fast, how slow, what does it take? What's average engagements? How do people get started? What does this kind of look like for a company that's out in the market and evaluating bringing cybersecurity into their organization?
Yeah, we have some fantastic cybersecurity sales specialists, and we have inbounds. We have people, calling, emailing, reaching out with our BDR team. We've seen in instances, especially when there has been an issue, they realize that there's an issue or a breach. We've seen these close very quickly in less than a couple of days. For a normal sales cycle, obviously the engagement, we get involved, we understand their environment, kind of the process Bandos kind of spoke to with the deployment, right? That's mirrored with our discovery, with our sales teams. They go through, they understand the environment. We make sure that we fit the right product and service to what they really need. But we can see the sales cycle still be very quickly, because you hate to sell on fear, but there is fear out there in the marketplace. No doubt about it. So these are actually a little bit faster sales cycles than what I'm accustomed to from other parts of the tech stack at, UC and CCAS. So you can see anything from 30, 45 days up, depending on enterprise. But again, it's that white glove approach, not just at deployment and onboarding with Bandos team, but from the very beginning. We're going to have, the opportunity to deep dive, give a demo, have proposals, have conversations and discussions about what it looks like, and then rope in those teams, Bandos deployment, our customer success team. So white glove approach from the beginning.
I don't want to call you like a professional services or a consultant, right? But, when you think about that level of service, I mean, if you go out and you need an internet circuit for your office, you can go out and say, okay, it's relatively commoditized. Vendor A, B, C, D can provide service to this location. Which one do you like? Which one do you not like? Which one has a better pricing promo? And it's a relatively easy decision. You look at this, it's not as clear cut, especially if a company hasn't purchased this before, hasn't been down this road, isn't comparing with an existing service. How do you help them through that of like, okay, we're looking at Xcitium, and because we have a corporate policy, we're looking at X, Y, and Z as well. How do you help them increase certainty, and what's that process like to bring people across the bridge of like this is lowering risk, increasing certainty, and understanding the outcome they're going to actually get?
Yeah, I believe that we do have the opportunity that throughout that sales cycle and making them more comfortable with our people, with our processes, with the platform itself, we also do offer a POC, right? Let's take it for a test drive. Let us show you what it looks like in your environment. Our POCs are pretty brief. We go in, we throw some attacks at it, let it test it out. They have that time to really get comfortable with the controls and the admin and what the dashboard looks like. And once the POC is over, again, the deployment, the teams, everyone's wrapped around this customer. It is a big decision. This is what's going to protect your company, right? And we take that very seriously.
Okay, so with a car buying analogy, they can kick the tires, they can take a POC, they can install the agent on a few devices, they can get a feel for it, they can see it running, you can simulate some stuff against it, they can understand what they're getting themselves into and use that as part of a purchase decision.
Absolutely.
Tim, Dani, any last words? Not really that ominous, but is there anything we have not covered here? Are there any hidden slides? I think we actually got to the end of the slide deck.
I think for any listeners or people who want to learn a little bit more, engaging with us, I mean, you can even go to openedr.com and spin up a free instance yourself. Typically we like to kind of handhold you through that process, make sure you're comfortable with it. But for customers who want to just dive right in, they can actually go out and spin up a free instance. But we recommend, checking us out, right? I mean, I know we're, once again, a relatively newer name to the long list of MDR Xcitium players, but we offer a really great service. The individuals on my team all have, 15 to 20 plus years of experience in incident response. All of our SOC level 1 analysts have at least 5 to 6 plus years of experience. So we really have put together, a solid team, right? We don't have entry level analysts who just started out. I mean, we really have people who understand the cybersecurity industry.
So I'm actually going to counter him a little bit. Any listeners that are interested in Xcitium, please reach out to Max Clark. On top of all of the wonderful resources we've spoken to and explained, Max actually has, in our channel program, has additional resources on top of that. We have our team there to support Max's client base. We have additional escalation points, executive support from the highest level. Our CEO, Ken Levine, he's wonderful. So we have a full team backing Max and dedicated to him for our channel partners.
You're going to make me blush, Dani.
Yeah, you can just edit my comment out. That was much better.
Also, I just have to say, Max, knowing Tim Bandos, I think he knows the first rule of Fight Club. You don't talk about Fight Club, so I'm going to have to pin him down about those secret societies. I'm not believing that.
Yeah. Guys, thank you very much. This is great. I appreciate it. There's a lot of noise, and I do this for a living, and there's a lot of noise, and it's confusing to understand and figure out. And I mean, sometimes these things become easy of like, there's only one path or two paths that make sense. And then sometimes it gets really hard. And cybersecurity is one of those things that's not really cut and dry anymore. There's so many factors, and there's so many potential outcomes, and there's so much noise. And making sure that people have a good experience and a positive outcome is really important.
I agree, Max. Yeah, well said.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much. Have a great day.